Welcome back. The 28th session of the 2023 United Nations Climate Change Conference is set to take place from the 30th of November until the 12th of December at the Expo City in Dubai. The conference, as others before, will bring government together to accelerate global efforts to confront the climate crisis and also address issues related to the Sustainable Development Mechanism. COP28 is also pulling the youth up the scale through efforts aimed to expand youth participation, especially youth from underrepresented groups in climate change policy making. In the same vein, the Global Center on the Adaptation hosted a hashtag Youth for Adaptation event earlier this week, bringing together leaders from government, international organizations, youth leaders, as well as policy and decision makers in preparation for COP28. Namibia's youth are also making their mark on the battle against climate change, and for this conversation, we're now joined virtually by youth advocate for sustainable development, Deon Shekuza. Deon, good morning, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. I hope you can hear me well.
I can hear you loud and clear. Perhaps, in your opinion, why is it important that the youth has a seat at the table when it comes to finding solutions to this issue of climate change?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, and good morning to all the viewers and listeners. Greetings from Dubai, here the host of the COP28 conference. So in answering the question in short, one has to first and foremost accept the fact that climate change is a wicked and complex challenge that requires wise and diverse perspectives, thus meaning innovative solutions are very much required in addressing this challenge. And one can admit that the youth are the most affected by the long-term consequences of climate change, and therefore they should have a seat at the table. The unique skills and talent youth possess can also assist in answering the more complex complexities of climate change. For example, a young engineer can support building contraptions during extreme events to help people adapt to that. For example, the floods that we had recently in the north, where the school kids were also inundated to move. And as such, this is where young people can temporarily come up with these innovative ways for us to adapt. And it's also very important considering the fact that young people are going to inherit the planet from the older generation. And they basically have to be prepared for such a process. And if you look at the Namibia Constitution in particular, Article 95L, it speaks about the role of promoting welfare of society through sustaining natural resources and ensuring that we do not compromise the ability of future generations to conduct their own affairs. And that is the essence of why youth are very important in such a dialogue.
All right. Deon, what do you hope will be the direction of COP28 this year as far as the African continent is concerned?
Yeah, first and foremost, the vulnerability that Africa faces is quite important. And since Paris Agreement, the African group has been pushing something called the African Needs in Special Circumstances. We are trying to get the world to recognize our unique and special circumstances, in particular, looking at principles like the common cause concern for climate, but the differentiated responsibility and respective capacities that we all possess. And therefore, Africa, in short, was trying to be omitted partially from some of the responsibilities because we are like the most impacted, and yet we're reaching a stage where we are expected to contribute in terms of climate action at the same rate and level as everybody else, including those who are basically behind the cause of this challenge. And therefore, one of the exits for this is like at the agendas for the negotiations this year, we have one item called the special needs and circumstances of Africa, which are the ones that we are currently trying to negotiate. And we hope that out of this COP, this is a position that it would be formally adopted, because what that would mean is every activity of the COP and the action that are being taken would consider that African citizens and states and government, for example, need to be given more of a break and a support when they are pursuing this so they can meet their national goals while also adapting to climate, because climate adaptation and climate mitigation are not supposed to be necessarily national development according to funders. They are not interested in funding our development, but funding our climate responses. And for us, it's quite a thin line in between. And that's why we are hoping the direction at this COP can recognize that and give Africa a bit of that latitude in the space.
All right. Deon, climate finance was under the spotlight at COP27 last year, and it was pledged at COP26. Now, in your opinion, what is needed to double adaptation finance as well as pledge at COP26? And also, how can the international processes like the Global Goal on Adaptation enable resources allocation?
I like that question because I think it's far more important for us in developing nations, because there's an unfair balance between mitigation funding and adaptation funding. So this year, the world is also trying to discuss a constituted definition of adaptation in terms of a global goal. And it's within this framework and instruments of discussion that we are trying to also integrate the role of doubling adaptation financing, for example, from like doubling it by 2025 so that the 2019 levels are at least increased. And one of the ways they are doing that currently is through country compacts and also adaptation acceleration country programs. And one of the aims for us in the negotiations for the global goal on adaptation is to ensure that the doubling of adaptation financing is increased, because there's this new theory that is saying that either you adapt or you die. And that is ideally determined and conditioned by the fact that you need financing, and adaptation financing is far way beyond than the cost of mitigation that we have, because it's so difficult to cost ecosystem services and damages, but it's easier to cost how many megawatts of energy you need, and therefore how much of that infrastructure would cost you, as opposed to adaptation, where there's so many complexities from livelihoods to other species that are being impacted that we probably even depend on, like bees that ensure up to three portions of the food we eat are provided by the pollination that they carry out. So doubling adaptation financing is a very, very important target, and it's one that we are currently pushing. And it's not just in the COP negotiations, there's also outside meetings, roundtable investors, meeting with presidents, and the GCA, or the Global Center on Adaptation, is currently trying to use the leverage power of African heads of states to push that on the global level, that we need more financing for adaptation. Because if we do not double that financing, we would be forced to take money that was meant for other social programs in order for us to look at drip irrigation activities, to look at the drought activities. And adaptation is but one. Then there's also loss and damage, which is also a whole new demand for financing. So it's definitely something that needs to be carried out for, and there isn't a clear answer as to how we will reach the doubling of adaptation financing, but we are starting with the quantified, not the quantified goal, but the adaptation goal that we are trying to define. And then once the COP agrees that this is the goal for adaptation and this is the finances we need, it would be much, much more easier for us then to access the adaptation financing through the climate financial mechanisms such as the Green Climate Fund and the Special Climate Funds.
All right. Deon, perhaps lastly, if you could just share with us your expectations ahead of COP28.
I expect African states to take a center role, because we have been for a very long time observers to this process. And it's now the 28th session since the Conference of Parties has taken place in 1995, our first session. And Namibia has been signatories to these instruments for long. Namibia is currently undertaking very big projects as well, like the green hydrogen. And we also have new areas in which we are looking at. So I hope from this COP is that it would commit a large more portion of funding towards adaptation. The loss and damage mechanism fund that we are currently negotiating, we also hope that comes to life. Then the disaster risk reduction fund we have under the Office of the Prime Minister in Namibia could tap into such international mechanisms to finance our drought responses. We also hope that the youth question is also addressed, because the issue of youth is increasing, because we are creating awareness, but when the young people are aware, there aren't enough capacities involved to get them actively engaged. So we are hoping to look into how this COP can deliver, in particular for Africa, because for long, Africa has been attending more or less this COP to support the solidarity that we have committed ourselves to. But now we have to make a very unique demand and argue that the temperature is increasing, but the finances and the impacts are not equivalent in terms of reducing the impacts and increasing the finances and our capacity. So my wish is basically for the African states to come out of this COP with a stronger commitment that helps us understand how much financing will come to us, because it will help us budget to know that this year we don't need to budget that much for extreme events, for example, because we are getting these kind of financial flows. So it's more of a technical outcome that I'm looking for, and less of the rhetorical outcomes that we always get out of COP, but something practical that we can definitely utilize. And also, I think the Africa Climate Summit this year, from 30 African presidents, also made strong declarations on what we want as Africans, and finances is one of the key elements. And I think going into this COP, also as African youth, we gathered 600 youth earlier in September. We are going in as a strong force in this COP, and we are hoping that we come out with a very more stronger position. So those are some of the views I have, and I will update as we keep going, and perhaps post as well. Thank you.
Most definitely. Thank you so much, Deon, and we wish you all the best with the conference.
Same here. You guys take care.
Deon Shekuza joining us. He is a youth advocate for sustainable development, and he was just sharing his thoughts and views on COP28 and also some of his expectations.